Hello, this is Jessica Williams, the author of the Imagia trilogy, and today I will be starting out and giving you the first chapter of my first book, which is called The Gateway to Imagia, The Tale of Sam Little. Let's get a couple of things out of the way just so we know that this is okay for me to do and put out there publicly on YouTube. I do own all of the copyright and publishing rights to this book series, so I am giving myself permission to do this so that nobody flags me for copyright violation. So just a little bit here. All rights to this book are reserved. Any portion of it may not be reproduced or used in any manner whatsoever without the express permission of me, the publisher. It is a work of fiction, so any names, characters, places, and incidents are products of the writer's imagination or have been used fictitiously and are not to be construed as real. Any resemblance to persons living or dead, actual events, locales, or organizations is entirely coincidental. Alright, so this book was printed in 2013 and this was the first publication. So now that that's out of the way, I'm going to go ahead and read the first chapter. Again, the book is called The Gateway to Imagia, The Tale of Sam Little. And this is chapter 1, The Wish. Two blue eyes were nervously staring out from the bushes. There was an odd combination of fear and excitement hidden in their innocence. Well concealed behind the bushes was a lanky 9-year-old boy. His mouse-brown hair was messy and bits of leaves were littered through it, making it look all that much more unkempt. As he hunkered down in the shadows of the bush, he silently thanked his mom for washing his favorite green shirt. It aided in his attempt for camouflage. He sat as quietly as he could while he peered out into the sun of the day. He hadn't moved in at least 10 minutes, and his knees were starting to ache from kneeling on the dry dirt. He looked out again. There was no sign of danger from any direction, so he crawled further into the line of shrubs. As he quietly crawled along, he placed his palm down on a sharp root that jutted awkwardly out from the ground. It pierced the soft flesh, and he let out a quiet "Ouch!" He looked at his hand and saw the fresh bit of blood oozing from the small wound. He wiped it on the edge of his jean shorts. As he sat back down, he realized that his presence was no longer unnoticed. He held his breath and listened carefully. He leaned cautiously forward and tried to see what lurked beyond the safety of the bushes, and as he leaned in, a twig cracked under his hand. Any hope he had of remaining hidden was gone. "He's over here!" a deep voice hollered. It came from just a few feet from where the boy was hiding. No longer relying on his chances for remaining hidden, he risked a closer look. A large, scaly, human-like creature with broken horns on his head was beckoning to the others with his gnarled hand. He had a severe underbite that was lined with jagged teeth. His nose was short and stubby, and it turned upright at a harsh angle. He stalked closer to where the boy was still doing his best to remain hidden. But despite all his best efforts, his brief encounter with the root had betrayed his position. For a moment he considered the odds of outrunning his attacker. Then 3 others appeared at the first one's side, and they all lumbered closer to him. The boy knew his odds of outrunning 4 was significantly worse than just 1. So he puffed out his chest and whispered to himself, "Fine. If you want to fight, then that's what you'll get." He braced himself for the fight that was sure to come. As his 4 attackers closed the distance between them, he risked moving to a more strategic position. He started weaving on his knees through the bushes as quick as he could. Unfortunately, he snagged his shirt on a dead twig. "Oh no!" he muttered. Frantically, he tried to reach around and free himself, but it was too late. The creature was already there, and without any more warning, 2 scaled hands reached through the bushes and pulled him out, tearing a hole in his shirt in the process. "Gotcha!" the biggest one yelled, while holding him up by his shirt. The boy kicked out hard in hopes of impacting the creature's shin. It was a successfully aimed kick, but it didn't do much good. It only made the creature angrier, and he pushed the boy backwards into the hard ground. He felt the wind rush out of his lungs as he landed on his back. Trying to get his bearings, he looked up and saw the 4 creatures silhouetted against the afternoon sun, and he knew that there was no way he'd win this fight. 4 against 1 was horrible odds for a boy his size. He decided his best chance was to run, but his decision was 2 seconds too late. As he started to get up, they already had him by the shirt again. "Where do you think you're going?" the leader asked. The boy kicked out again and demanded, "Let go of me!" "Or what? You're barely big enough to make a shadow." The other 3 laughed as the boy was dropped on the ground again. He bumped his elbow and he felt a sting of fresh abrasion. He stood up and backed up against the bushes, and he looked for a quick escape, but was blocked on all sides. He glared up at them. The leader glared back and then grabbed him again. "You know what we want, so you might as well just give it up before you get hurt." He smiled devilishly. "I don't have it, so back off." The boy's threatening tone pushed the leader further, and he punched him in the belly. "Give it to me, little shrimp." As he regained his breath from the jab to his stomach, he started to nod his head. "Okay," he puffed. He reached a small hand into his pocket and slowly fished for something. When he saw that they were gloating in their success, the boy turned heel, ducked under one of their arms, and sprinted off along the line of bushes. Turning his head, he could see that the 4 were gaining on him quickly. He came to the end of the bushes and made a sharp left turn. In doing so, he lost his footing and fell, face first, onto the hard ground. There was a blinding pain to his chin as the rocky ground grated across his skin. He tried to ignore the pain and was about to jump to his feet when he looked up and saw a pair of brown dress shoes a foot away from his face. He slowly pushed himself off of his chest and looked up. The man looked down through his wire-framed glasses at the boy. He had a mixture of anger and confusion on his face. "Sam? What on earth happened to you?" he asked. He reached a hand down to help the boy to his feet and then looked up suddenly at the 4 that had just turned the corner and joined them. Realization swept over the man's face, and he barked at the 4. "You 4, get over here right now!" When they hesitantly approached, he asked harshly, "What is going on here?" Sam stared down at his tennis shoes, while the leader of his 4 attackers said, "Nothing, sir. We were just messing around. Isn't that right, Sam?" Sam looked up to make eye contact with the one who'd punched him just moments ago. There, where the 4 scaly creatures would have been, were 4 very normal-looking boys. He nervously glanced between the boys and the man and said nothing. The man looked down at Sam and asked more gently, "Did Parker hurt you, Sam?" Sam managed a small shrug and then said, "No, Mr. Connor." Mr. Connor squinted while he thought. He looked down at Sam's clenched fist and saw the wad of crumpled dollar bills in his hand. He shook his head and turned back to the 4 boys. "You 4, my office, now." Parker glared at Sam. Then he turned to head for the principal's office. Sam knew that this would only make things worse, but figured that he had other things to deal with at the moment. Principal Connor was giving him a once-over as he clucked his tongue. "Sam, I know this goes without saying, but you really should just give them what they want next time. $3 in lunch money is hardly worth all of this," he said as he pulled a handkerchief from his pocket. He dabbed at the blood on Sam's chin. "You can always come and tell me or any other teacher about it later, and we would deal with them appropriately. Now, how did all this happen?" He gestured to all of Sam's wound. "Did those 4 do all of this?" Sam shook his head. He was suddenly aware of the pains in his chin and elbow. "No, sir. I was hiding in the bushes and, well, Mostly I just fell down. Mr. Connor looked at Sam's elbow and said, "Were you using your imagination again?" "Yes, sir." Sam felt embarrassed suddenly. "Well," Mr. Connor sighed, "let's get you over to the nurse's office. But you really do need to keep your head out of the clouds. And next time, just come tell me and I'll take care of things." Sam followed the principal. He pocketed his money and rubbed his belly where Parker had punched him. He silently wondered what his mom and dad would say when Mr. Connor called them on his last day of school, especially when they found out he was using his imagination there again. No one seemed to understand Sam's obsession with imagining. He was always getting into trouble from not paying attention in class or getting himself into sticky situations with his much larger classmates. Being the smallest in his class made him vulnerable as a target, and though he felt stronger and much more comfortable in his imaginary world, it always seemed to get him into trouble one way or another. As the end of the day came, Sam sat in his class and watched the clock. The sting of his chin had become a dull ache, and he itched at the bandage on his elbow. Luckily, Parker and his gang were a grade above him, so they didn't share classes. The worst he had to suffer was hearing a few jokes from the kids who sat closest to him. Their jeers barely fazed him as he watched the clock hit 3:14. Another minute more and he'd be free for the summer, free from the bullies and jokes at his expense for 3 whole months. But most importantly, free to imagine as much as he wanted without the mundane interference of school. The bell rang, and Sam was out the door before the other kids had time to get their footing. His mom agreed to pick him up from school after Principal Connor called and explained the happenings of the morning. He saw their dark blue family car waiting for him at the front of the parking lot. He was about to run to it, but slowed down when he thought about the talk she was sure to have with him about the fight today. When he'd convinced himself that he'd done nothing to get in trouble for, he started to pick up the pace and was opening the door in no time. As he buckled in, he could hear the irritation in her sigh. "Samuel Isaac Little, I can't stress how frustrated I was to get a phone call from Principal Connor on the last day of school. How is it possible that you can't go 1 week without one of these little incidents?" Sam shrugged. "I don't know. But this time it wasn't my fault, Mom." As she stared back to him from the rear-view mirror, she saw his injured chin, and her eyes softened. She sighed again, but this time with compassion. "We'll discuss it later with your dad. Let's just get you home. You have a big day tomorrow, and I'll never be able to frost your birthday cake without you." She smiled warmly at him. He grinned back. Tomorrow was definitely a big day for Sam. His 10th birthday was the reason this day couldn't go fast enough. Sam lived at 1023 Treetop Lane at the edge of a very large forest. Everyone around them came to know Sam as the Littlest Little. He was born to George and Sarah Little, and he was premature, and he did not seem to grow as fast as the other children. His mom constantly made it a point to tell him that he wasn't small, he just hadn't grown into his personality yet. Oddly enough, he didn't seem to care too much that he was a couple of inches shorter than the other kids in his class. In school, he was always picked last by the kids. No one wanted to have him on their team. He always had to sit in the front row so that the teacher could see him when he raised his hand, which of course only gave the kids another reason to make fun of him. In all fairness, Sam was not the shortest person in the world. In fact, if he went to a bigger school in a bigger city, he probably wouldn't be the shortest person there. But to family, neighbors, and everyone else for that matter, he was just plain, well, for lack of a better word, little. Being regarded as such a small person with even smaller abilities was enough to bother any kid. Size always seemed to be such an issue to people. The bigger, the better. The bigger you are, the more things you get to do. The more things you get to do, the more friends you have. The more friends meant more fun, and more fun is naturally better for any normal kid. Of course, Sam wasn't exactly a normal kid. In his mind, he was a giant among mice. His idea of fun didn't require a group of friends at a pizza place or a sleepover. All he needed to have the adventure of a lifetime was his dog, a bright sunny day, and perhaps an overgrown lawn. Sam may be little by name and little by stature, but his imagination is bigger than the world. He was not well liked amongst the kids his age. It never seemed fair to judge him for his size, but regardless, this made his days rather unpleasant. Between the name-calling and the constant being picked on, the only part of his day that he could honestly look forward to was the part that wasn't real. From the moment he realized he was capable of using his imagination, Sam utilized every opportunity he could to retreat from the doldrums of his life and go to his special world. Mr. and Mrs. Little knew that Sam's imagination was always taking him somewhere. He was always trying to tame the wild and vicious Necor cat that stood 4 feet tall with razor-sharp claws, 3 eyes, and saber teeth. Of course, to Mr. and Mrs. Little, it was only their fat yellow tabby cat, Cooper. He went on countless adventures riding on the shoulders of Yetus, a 10-foot-tall black hairy creature whose complex language could only be understood by Sam. When he and his imaginary best friend would go on adventures, Titus, the family dog, was all anyone else could see. And, of course, his parents still made him eat his peas, even though he insisted that only the fuzzy-footed Migglewumps could eat them without dying a most horrible death. Yes, Sam definitely marched to the beat of his own drum. Though frustrated by it, his parents understood why he escaped into his imaginary world, and they felt sorry for their son. They hoped that he would outgrow his awkward phase after he added a few inches to his height. But what they didn't realize was how badly Sam wished they were all real. Yetus, the Necor cat, the fuzzy-footed Migglewumps, they were all merely figments of a child's overdeveloped imagination, but they all seemed to fit into this strange little world he'd created. He'd talked of his imaginary friends often, mostly due to the fact that he had no real ones. When dinner came and they would ask Sam about his day, they would rarely hear of happenings at school. Rather, he would go on and on about his imaginary adventures. Though, try as they might to understand him, many times they ended up shrugging off his strange stories. Over time, they became used to it and chalked it up to the phase he was going through. If they'd have known that on this very day, at their very house, an exceptionally strange phenomenon was about to take place, they may not have put all 10 candles on Sam's birthday cake. Sam had been waiting for this day for what seemed to be a lifetime. It was May 26th. Yesterday had been his last day of school. And his big 10th birthday party was now mere moments away. He had convinced himself that turning 10 years old was the most important age to become. This idea was solely based on the idea of wishes. Everyone knows that, short of a 4-leaf clover or a shooting star, you only get one true wish each year, and it involves flaming candles on a birthday cake. Naturally, a majority of wishes don't come true for most people. Otherwise, everyone would be going around getting whatever they wanted, nearly all of the time, so Sam believed that these wishes were granted only in very special circumstances. In fact, he believes this theory so much that he had been saving up all of his past birthday wishes. It was time to cash in on all of the forfeited wishes of the past. Today was the day. Each time he would go on an imaginary adventure with Yetus, he would think about how awesome it would be if the adventures were real, and if his best friend wasn't really just an ordinary, scraggly dog, especially when that dog was virtually incapable of letting him ride on his shoulders. Titus was great, but he wasn't Yetus. Yetus was big enough to carry both him and a dog with 2 arms tied behind his back, and after today he was convinced that things were going to be much different. His party was to start at 4 o'clock, and it was 3:45 at this very moment. His parents had given him a digital watch for an early birthday present. From the moment he had woken up this morning, he had been asking repetitively, "How much longer until the party?" They let him open the watch early so he could keep an eye on the time himself and stop pestering them. Now he couldn't seem to stop watching the minutes tick by at a snail's pace. He knew that at any moment relatives would be arriving with presents and happy birthday greetings, and Sam could barely stand himself. "Oh, why won't they just get here?" he said impatiently. "My goodness, Sam! They will be here in a few minutes. A little patience, please," his mom hollered from across the house. She had just finished stringing up the last blue balloon. She knew how excited Sam had been for his birthday this year, but she wasn't sure why this birthday seemed so much more important to him than all of his previous birthdays. She shrugged off this thought and went into the kitchen. He blatantly rolled his eyes at his mom's lack of understanding. She didn't seem to understand the importance of this day. Didn't she realize what turning 10 really meant? He sighed and then looked at his watch again. This time it was only 3:46. "Oh, sheesh!" he cried. "Only 1 minute's gone by." He grumbled to himself and plopped down dramatically on the couch. After waiting 10 years for this day, the next 14 minutes seemed like an eternity away. For a 10-year-old boy, patience was a great thing to ask for, especially for Sam. He was lying on his back with his skinny legs dangling over the arm of the couch. The sun was shining brightly outside, and it was the first day of his long-awaited summer vacation. The majority of his vacation was spent outside, and despite the anticipation of the party today, was no different than the rest. Summer vacation was always the best time of his year. Having no friends actually made things easier because he preferred the company of his imaginary ones anyways. His mouse-brown hair was messy, despite the fact that his mother had tried to comb it down for the party. There were grass stains on his jean shorts, and he was mindlessly picking at a patch of dried mud on his orange t-shirt. He still wore his bandage on his arm from his skirmish at school, and the cut on his chin had purpled and left a thick, unsightly scab. Though his appearance only told him that he'd been having some rather good adventures, his mom was a bit irked that he had already dirtied his new birthday party clothes. He seemed to always be getting into something, including trouble. His mom was always trying to tell him that his curiosity was going to lead him somewhere dangerous someday. Sam always scoffed at this. He only wished that there was something more dangerous than his backyard. He also considered himself to be the bravest kid in the world, so he figured that this was what his parents said, to keep the good stuff hidden. As he lay on the couch, swinging his legs impatiently, the doorbell rang. Finally. It was music to his ears. "Mom!" hollered Sam. "They're here!" He jumped off the couch and bolted to the door. When he opened the door, he saw it was his Aunt Josephine holding a rather large box wrapped with lots of elaborate bows. Grandma Little followed her with a soft package that resembled the same hand-knitted sweater he seemed to get every year. He silently grumbled. He never understood why she always insisted on giving him a sweater at the beginning of summer. Cousins, aunts, and uncles shortly began to filter their way through the house, and soon the house was buzzing with the happenings of the party. The mountain of presents piled higher on the living room floor, but it wasn't nearly enough to stop him from thinking about his wonderful birthday cake. Those 10 glorious candles were just waiting to be blown out. He wrinkled his nose at the thought of waiting until all the presents were open before they could have the cake. But as the thought about what might be inside of those carefully wrapped gifts, he figured that it might not be such a bad thing. Maybe he would get that superhero cape he had wanted for so long. It would definitely come in handy on all of his adventures. When the last guest finally made their way into the house, his mom began to shuffle everyone into the living room to start the festivities. She pulled Sam away from the pile of gifts and herded him into the middle of the room where his cousins were waiting for him. Being the center of attention was never Sam's idea of a good time, but, generally speaking, he was easily overlooked due to his size, so he only had to hear the embarrassment of his cooing aunts for a few moments before he was nearly hidden in the mayhem. It wasn't hard to lose sight of him amongst the rubble of presents and shredded wrapping paper as he tore through each gift at record speed. He opened the first one from his Grandma Little. He was right about the sweater, nothing too thrilling, but he thanked her just the same. The next one was a board game he had played once at his cousin's house. They must have thought he enjoyed it enough to buy him the same one. His mom handed him the next present. She smiled and stood back to watch him open it. He tore through the paper and ripped open the box. He jumped up and held a large red piece of cloth out for everyone to see. Thanks, Mom and Dad. He was genuinely excited for this one. Sam was about to swing it over his shoulder when his least favorite aunt asked in slight disgust, "Isn't he a bit old for a blankie?" Sam began to get angry and almost replied, but his mom spoke up first. The smile that was on her face was temporarily replaced by annoyance. "It just so happens to be a superhero cape." And as though she meant to frustrate his aunt one step further, she helped Sam fasten it around his shoulders. Then she knelt down in front of Sam and grinned again. "A perfect hero cape for the world's greatest adventurer." She winked, and Sam beamed. "Thanks, Mom." Even though they had a hard time understanding his need for his imaginary world, his parents always supported him. It always made things a little easier when it came to his closed-minded family. There were a few more boxes with clothes, a couple of superhero action figures, a baseball bat and glove, and a frog flashlight from his uncle that he had added to the pile. He thanked each person as he opened the gifts, and then they moved on to the games. Sam didn't understand why there had to be games. It was frustrating to lose every time at his birthday party. His cousins weren't entirely fond of Sam either. A simple game of musical chairs seemed to get rougher than necessary. He was getting tripped far too often and receiving too many suspicious knocks from elbows that he should have. It gave Sam the feeling of being in school, and it was spoiling his good mood. Sam had lost yet another game, and as he sat on the sideline, he could hear the remarks of a few family members as they commented about the fact that there were no kids his age there. One of his aunts was clucking her tongue and shaking her head. "It's a shame he doesn't have any friends, but I suppose he's a bit strange for his age. Maybe with time," she trailed off when she noticed that Sam was sitting so close. Sam rolled his eyes. He loved his family, but their lack of understanding him was annoying. Though not soon enough, the games were finally over, and his mom whispered into his ear as she passed him, "Get your wish ready, kiddo. It's birthday cake time." She grinned at him, and his returning smile stretched from ear to ear. The moment he'd been building up for 10 years was finally upon him. The birthday wish of all birthday wishes was about to be made. His spirits started to rise again. Sam's mom and dad disappeared into the kitchen. Everyone squeezed around the dining room table as his mom placed the blue and red iced cake down in front of Sam. It was decorated with a picture of his favorite superhero. "Well," said his dad after carefully lighting each candle, "do you know what you're going to wish for?" "Yep," Sam said. "Good," said his dad. "Wouldn't want to waste a good wish on something silly, right?" Sam didn't answer. He just smiled as he watched the tiny flickering flames dance before his eyes. George and Sarah smiled, and everyone broke into a round of happy birthday, and as the last line was sung, Sam realized that the time had finally come. He closed his eyes tight and wished the only wish he had wanted for as long as he could remember. "I wish I can make my imagination real," he said in his mind. He opened his eyes, took a deep breath, and blew with all his might until all 10 flames disappeared into smoke. Everyone clapped, and his mom started to cut the cake. He didn't want anyone to know about his wish, so he'd have to wait until after the party to try it out. It was a secret meant only for him. "So, what did you wish for?" asked his dad as he pat Sam on his back. He knew better than to answer that question. "Geez, Dad, I can't tell you what I wished for. It won't come true that way." A few chuckles rounded the table as he said this, but he paid no mind to them. They apparently didn't understand the serious nature of birthday wish rules. It seemed to take an eternity for everyone to eat their cake. And just when he thought that the party was over, all of his relatives managed to sit around and jabber on about things that Sam couldn't care less about. His mom noticed Sam sulking in the corner and fiddling idly with a few of his new toys. She had been listening intently to Grandma Little, but noticing his deteriorating mood, she decided to begin the process of subtly shooing everyone out the door one by one. Shortly after his mom's efforts to end the party, there were but a few crumbs of cake left. Empty party cups and plates littered the table, and the last guests were shuffling out the front door. Sam impatiently listened to the final "Happy birthday" from Grandma Little, and finally the door closed, leaving the blissful sound of silence in its wake. Sam's mood was instantly lightened. He sprinted to the living room, grabbed his most essential presents, and took them to his room. He sat down to take mental inventory of everything he got and was worth making note of. It was actually a pretty good birthday when all said and done. But time was wasting, and he had a wish to get fulfilled. Sitting there on the floor seemed to be the perfect time to test the results. He jumped up and in his haste nearly slammed his dog's tail in the door. Titus didn't seem to notice and plopped himself down on his favorite spot on the floor. He could hear his parents in the kitchen cleaning up and knew that he was alone for the time. He thought for only a moment as to what he would imagine first. It only took him half of that moment to decide. There was only one constant in his imagination, and he dearly longed for a chance to meet him. Sam closed his eyes. As clearly as he could, he pictured his hairy best friend Yetus. As always, he was deep in his imagination instantly. When the image was as real to him as he could imagine it, he took a deep breath. He smiled and readied himself for the awesomeness of his granted wish. Slowly, Sam opened his eyes. He looked around the room eagerly. But when he saw nothing out of the ordinary, he tried again, concentrating on every detail of Yetus's face, from the emerald green eyes to the way his ears drooped ever so slightly. He pictured every hair on his shaggy body, concentrating on the precise color and sheen. Still nothing appeared in front of him. He tried again and again with the same lack of success as each time before until he realized that Yetus wasn't going to show. Titus, his shabby mutt, would continue his role as Yetus, and Cooper was always going to remain nothing but a fat old yellow tabby cat that would play the part of an evil Necor cat. His heart sank. How is this possible? He asked himself. I saved every single birthday wish for this day. I just don't get it. Disappointment fell over his small face. His mom knocked and then walked into the room just in time to see Sam kick one of his new action figures across the room. She noticed his sad look and cocked an eyebrow. Didn't you have a nice birthday? He hadn't meant for her to see that. He put on a quick smile. Yeah, it was nice, Mom. Thanks for the hero cape, he said with forced excitement in his voice. Noticing her look of doubt, he mustered another smile, and she seemed to shrug off his demeanor as him being tired. Did you get everything you wanted this year? Yeah, I guess so. Well, I think maybe it's time to get ready for bed. She smiled down at him. It's been a long day for the birthday boy. All right, he sighed. He trudged past her with his pajamas in tow. She pat the top of his head lovingly as she passed him and said, Don't forget to brush your teeth. Okay. He took his bath, brushed his teeth, and slipped on his favorite red and blue pajamas with his cartoon monster on the shirt. His mom and dad tucked him into bed. His mom kissed him lightly on the forehead and said, Good night, sweetie. Happy birthday. Night, kiddo, said his dad as he gave him a quick hug. Night, Dad. And with that, they shut the door, and the late evening glow washed across the room. The sounds of summer hummed quietly out his slightly open window. Fireflies danced across the backyard, and cicadas buzzed in the thick trees of the forest behind their house. Sam lay there in bed wondering what he had done wrong when he wished for his big wish earlier. Did he forget something? Did he miss a candle when he blew them out? He heaved a heavy sigh and gazed out his bedroom window into the dusky evening. His dog's cold nose bumped his hand on his bed. He panted and then whined briefly in hopes of some extra attention, and even though he wasn't Yetus, Titus was the best friend he had in the real world. He smiled and scratched behind his ears and said, Well, Titus, I guess it's still just you and me. He thought for a moment and then wondered aloud. Maybe it's the 11th birthday wish and I wished too soon. Disappointed and confused, he lay there in bed pondering how many more birthday wishes he would have had to save to make his wish come true. Well, that's chapter 1. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope that you join me for Chapter 2, Granted, next time. Thanks. Bye.